My name is Dora Wilson, and I'm 54 years old. After 15 years of marriage, my husband Richard kicked me out of our home, blaming me for not giving him children. He told everyone I was broke and defective. 5 years later, I returned to Boston with twin boys, a miracle I never thought possible at my age. But I also came back with a secret that would destroy the perfect life Richard had built on his lies. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If my story of betrayal and vindication speaks to you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories of women who refuse to be erased. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened when I revealed my secret to the man who threw me away. Richard and I met at a medical conference in Chicago 15 years ago. I was 34 at the time, a rising hospital administrator with a reputation for turning around struggling departments. He was 36, a talented surgeon with ambition that matched his skill. I still remember how he approached me after my presentation on healthcare efficiency models, his confidence magnetic, as he challenged one of my points. That debate turned into drinks, which turned into dinner, which eventually turned into love. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips between Boston and Chicago, long phone calls that stretched into the early morning hours, the giddy excitement of finding someone who seemed to understand me completely. After 6 months, Richard suggested I apply for a position at his hospital in Boston. 3 months after that, he proposed on a sailboat in the harbor, the city skyline glittering behind him. "We're going to have an extraordinary life together," he promised, sliding a diamond ring onto my finger. I believed him. We married in a lavish ceremony at one of Boston's historic hotels. Richard's colleagues from the hospital filled the room alongside my family and friends who had flown in from across the country. I remember my sister Margaret whispering, "You hit the jackpot," as we watched Richard charm yet another group of guests. In many ways, she was right. Our first years together were golden. We bought a beautiful colonial home in an upscale suburb, furnished it with pieces we selected together on weekend antiquing trips. Richard's career flourished as he pioneered a new surgical technique that brought him national recognition. I excelled in my role at the hospital, implementing systems that saved millions while improving patient care. We traveled extensively collecting art and memories from Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. The only shadow on our happiness was our struggle to conceive. We started trying for a baby almost immediately after marriage, both of us excited about building a family. I was in my mid-30s, aware that fertility declined with age, but not particularly concerned. Richard, as a doctor, reassured me that many women had healthy pregnancies well into their 40s. After a year without success, we consulted a fertility specialist. I underwent a battery of tests, all of which came back normal. Unexplained infertility, the doctor called it. Richard had a basic semen analysis that he said showed nothing to worry about. We moved on to fertility treatments, first Clomid, then more invasive procedures. The years of treatment took a toll. The hormones made me emotional and bloated. The scheduled sex turned intimacy into a clinical exercise. The monthly disappointments accumulated into a mountain of grief neither of us knew how to climb. When I turned 40, we tried IVF, draining our savings for 3 expensive, painful cycles that all ended in failure. Maybe we should consider other options, I suggested one night after our final failed attempt. Adoption, or even accepting life without children. We have a good marriage, fulfilling careers. Richard was uncharacteristically quiet. In retrospect, that silence should have alarmed me. I first noticed the changes about 6 months later. Richard began working later, missing the dinners I prepared. His phone became a jealously guarded possession, always face down on surfaces password protected. He spoke less about his day, about our future. The wall between us built itself brick by brick while I pretended not to notice, afraid of what confrontation might reveal. Then came the night I found the text messages while Richard was in the shower. Jessica was her name, a new nurse in his department, 29 years old. Their exchanges were intimate, romantic, filled with plans and promises, and references to the child they would have together someday. When Richard emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed, his phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked, "or just keep lying indefinitely?" He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, his face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "What did you expect, Dora? We've been trying for 10 years. 10 years of my life waiting for a child that's never going to come. Our life together has only been about having children." The pain in my chest was physical crushing. "You know how much I wanted a family? I'm 46 now. How much longer am I supposed to wait?" His voice grew cold, clinical. "Jessica is fertile. We've already confirmed that." The words struck like physical blows. "You've been trying to get her pregnant while still married to me." Richard looked away, his silence confirmation enough. "I want you out," he said finally. "This isn't working anymore. It hasn't been for years." "This is my home too," I protested, disbelief mingling with my grief. "I paid for it," he said dismissively. "My name is on the mortgage. My career paid for everything in it." "We're partners," I reminded him. "Everything we've built has been together." He laughed, then a sound so cruel it seemed to come from a stranger. "Partners? You were supposed to give me children. That was your part of the bargain. And you failed." That night, Richard watched without emotion as I packed a suitcase with trembling hands. As I carried it downstairs, he delivered the final blow. "I've wasted 15 years with you, Dora. 15 years I could have spent building a real family with someone who isn't broken." I left our beautiful home in darkness my entire life, reduced to what fit in my car, the word broken, echoing in my mind like a curse. I drove to Margaret's house that night, showing up at her door at 2 a.m., incoherent with grief. My sister, 5 years older and infinitely wiser, took one look at my face and pulled me into her arms. "Whatever it is, we'll fix it," she promised, leading me to her guest room. But some things can't be fixed, only endured. The following weeks passed in a blur of practical nightmares. Richard froze our joint accounts. His lawyer, evidently secured well before that final confrontation, sent threatening letters about property division. Meanwhile, Richard spread his version of events throughout our professional community. I was unstable, obsessed with having children, to the detriment of our marriage, possibly even mentally ill from the hormonal treatments. Former colleagues avoided me. Invitations to social events mysteriously disappeared. Even friends I thought were mine proved to be primarily loyal to Richard and the access his position provided. My humiliation was complete when I overheard 2 hospital board members discussing me in the ladies' room. "Poor Richard," one said. 15 years with a woman who couldn't give him children, and then she has some kind of breakdown when he finally leaves." I didn't correct them. What was the point? Richard controlled the narrative just as he had controlled so much else. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks after our separation, delivered by courier to Margaret's house. They included a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from disparaging Richard publicly, along with settlement terms that would leave me with a fraction of what we had built together. The document also mentioned his intention to marry Jessica, with whom he was now expecting a child. Margaret urged me to fight. "Get a better lawyer. Don't let him bully you." But I was exhausted, defeated. The thought of a protracted legal battle, of having my fertility issues discussed in court, of being portrayed as the bitter, barren wife, I couldn't bear it. I signed the papers, accepted the meager settlement, and decided to disappear from Richard's perfect Boston life. Chicago seemed the logical choice for my fresh start. I'd worked there before, had some professional connections untainted by Richard's influence. I found a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood far different from the affluent suburb we'd called home. I accepted a position several steps down from my previous role, a department manager rather than an executive, at a community hospital struggling to stay afloat. The salary was enough to live on, but just barely. After 15 years of financial comfort, I found myself counting pennies shopping sales, making coffee at home instead of stopping at Starbucks. There was a strange freedom in this simpler life, though the adjustment was painful. Loneliness was my constant companion those first few months. At 49, I was starting over completely. No husband, no children, diminished career prospects, and a heart so battered I couldn't imagine ever trusting again. I joined a support group for divorced women, forcing myself to attend weekly meetings, even when all I wanted was to curl up alone in my apartment. It was at one of these meetings that I met Tanya, a vibrant kindergarten teacher whose husband had left her for his 20-something personal trainer. Her infectious laugh and refusal to be defined by her divorce slowly pulled me out of my shell. Through her, I met other women and gradually built a small circle of friends who knew nothing about my past life with Richard. 6 months into my Chicago residency, I developed severe abdominal pain that sent me to the emergency room. The diagnosis was ovarian cysts, not unusual for women my age, but concerning enough to warrant a specialist's care. That's how Dr. Elena Martinez entered my life, a fertility specialist with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "These cysts are common," she assured me after examining my scans, "but I'd like to run some additional tests given your history." I'd shared my years of infertility struggles with her, though not the painful end of my marriage. Elena listened without judgment, then surprised me with her assessment. "Based on these tests, I don't see any reason why you couldn't conceive with assistance. Your hormone levels are surprisingly good for your age." I laughed bitterly. "I'm almost 50, and I tried everything with my ex-husband. Nothing worked." Elena studied my chart thoughtfully. "Did your husband have a complete fertility workup? Not just the basic analysis, but the comprehensive testing?" "He had some tests," I said, vaguely realizing I'd never actually seen Richard's results. He'd always summarized them as fine or normal, and I trusted his medical expertise. Was all Elena said, making a note in my file. "Well, if you're ever interested, I'm conducting a clinical trial for a new fertility treatment specifically designed for women over 45. The preliminary results are promising." I shook my head immediately. I've accepted that motherhood isn't in my future. "Fair enough," Elena replied. "But the offer stands if you change your mind. Sometimes life surprises us." Over the following months, Elena became more than my doctor. She became a friend. We met for lunch, occasionally discovered a shared love of independent films, attended a few showings together. During one such outing, after a movie about a woman reconnecting with her estranged daughter, Elena broached the subject again. "Have you thought any more about the clinical trial? We're still accepting participants for another 2 weeks." I hesitated. "I don't know, Elena. I'm almost 50. Even if it worked, which seems unlikely after all my failed attempts, isn't it selfish to have a child at my age? Many women are having children later," she countered. "And you're healthy, financially stable, emotionally mature. Those are all advantages for a child." "I'd be a single mother," I pointed out. "With support," she reminded me. "You've built a community here. Margaret visits regularly. You wouldn't be alone." That night I couldn't sleep. The possibility Elena had dangled before me, motherhood even now, awakened a longing I tried to bury. My biological clock hadn't just ticked down, it had seemingly expired. Yet here was a scientist, a doctor I respected, telling me there might still be a chance. What did I have to lose? My pride, perhaps, if I tried and failed again. But hadn't I already lost everything else that mattered? The next morning, I called Elena's office and scheduled an appointment to discuss the clinical trial. One last attempt at the dream Richard had used to destroy me. The clinical trial Elena proposed was cutting edge, a combination of ovarian rejuvenation techniques, specialized hormone protocols, and an experimental fertilization method. The process would be invasive, expensive, though partially covered by the research grant, and physically demanding. The chances of success, she warned, were perhaps 20% at best given my age. "I want to try," I told her firmly, "but I can't go through this publicly. No one can know." Elena understood my need for privacy. The treatments were scheduled discreetly, often early mornings before my hospital shift or late evenings after. The hormone injections I administered myself, hiding the vials and needles in my bathroom cabinet, though no one ever visited my apartment. The egg retrieval was painful, yielding only 3 viable eggs, a miracle in itself, according to Elena. The fertilization process used donor sperm I selected from a database after hours of careful consideration. Then came the anxious wait to see if any embryos would develop. "We have 2, Elena called to tell me a week later. 2 healthy embryos, Dora. The implantation procedure was scheduled for the following day. I remember lying on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, trying not to hope too much. This probably won't work, I reminded myself as Elena transferred the embryos. Don't get attached to the idea. But in the secret chambers of my heart, I was already imagining what it would feel like to carry a child, to hold a baby of my own. 2 weeks later, Elena herself performed my pregnancy test, her hands steady as she drew my blood. The wait for results was excruciating. When she called me into her office, rather than giving me the results over the phone, I prepared myself for disappointment. "Sit down, Dora," she said, her expression unreadable. I sank into the chair, hands clasped tightly in my lap. "It's okay. I was prepared for this not to work." Elena's professional composure cracked a smile, breaking through. "It worked. You're pregnant." I stared at her, unable to process her words. "That's not possible." "Not only possible, but confirmed." She handed me the lab report. "Your HCG levels are higher than expected, actually." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the numbers on the page, proof of the impossible. "There's more," Elena continued gently. "We did an early ultrasound because of the hormone levels. Dora, both embryos implanted successfully. You're carrying twins." The room seemed to spin around me. Twins. At 49 years old, after years of failed fertility treatments with Richard. I was pregnant with twins as a single mother. The pregnancy was classified as high risk from the beginning. My age, the twin factor, and my history all contributed to Elena's concerned monitoring. I reduced my work hours at the hospital, taking family medical leave earlier than planned. My small circle of Chicago friends rallied around me, driving me to appointments, bringing healthy meals, helping me prepare my modest apartment for the baby's arrival. Margaret flew in from Boston monthly, eventually taking a leave of absence from her own job to stay with me for the final trimester. Her presence was my anchor as my body changed and my emotions fluctuated wildly between joy, terror, and lingering grief over the circumstances that had led me here. The boys arrived 6 weeks early, tiny but healthy, after a carefully managed C-section. Michael and Daniel, names I'd chosen for their strength and timelessness. As I held them for the first time, their small bodies warm against my chest, I experienced a love so overwhelming it seemed to rewrite every cell of my being. "They're perfect," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched her nephews sleep in their hospital bassinets. They were perfect, and they were mine alone. No one in Boston, least of all Richard, knew of their existence. The first year was a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Midnight feedings, first to smiles, the unique challenges of caring for identical twins as a single mother approaching 50. I took extended leave from the hospital, living frugally on my savings and the remains of my divorce settlement. My Chicago friends became family, stepping in when I was overwhelmed, celebrating each milestone with genuine joy. It was during the twins' second year that the past I'd carefully compartmentalized came crashing back into my life. A former Boston colleague, Susan, reached out via email to let me know she'd be in Chicago for a conference. We met for coffee while a neighbor watched the boys. "You look wonderful," Susan said, studying me across the table. "Motherhood suits you." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Excuse me. Your sister mentioned the twins when I ran into her at a fundraiser," Susan explained. "I was surprised, of course, but so happy for you." I managed a tight smile, making a mental note to discuss discretion with Margaret again. "How are things in Boston?" I asked, carefully changing the subject. Oh, the usual hospital politics. Susan waved her hand dismissively. Richard's doing well, chief of surgery now. Did you know his wife is expecting after several rounds of IVF, apparently? The information struck me with unexpected force. Jessica had been pregnant when they married, according to the divorce papers, which meant they'd either lost that baby or the information had been yet another of Richard's lies. Actually, Susan continued, lowering her voice, there's been some gossip. Richard had to undergo extensive fertility treatments himself. Turns out he has some condition affecting his sperm count. Ironic, isn't it? After all that business about you being the reason they couldn't conceive. The coffee shop seemed suddenly airless. Richard has fertility issues. Susan nodded. Severe oligospermia from what I heard. Barely any viable sperm. They had to use some specialized extraction technique for the IVF. Jessica let it slip at a dinner party after too much wine. I excused myself shortly after, mind reeling with this revelation. Back in my apartment after relieving my neighbor and settling the twins for their nap, I sat at my kitchen table and allowed the full implications to wash over me. Richard had known. He must have known about his condition during our marriage, during all those years of fertility treatments focused exclusively on my body. He had let me believe I was the problem, had watched me inject hormones, undergo painful procedures, grieve each failure as a personal deficiency. Then he had discarded me for being broken, while he was the one with the significant fertility issue all along. The extent of his deception was breathtaking, and as I looked at my sleeping sons, a new question formed in my mind. If Richard's condition was as severe as Susan had indicated, how had Jessica managed to conceive even with interventions? The medical odds seemed as improbable as my own miraculous pregnancy. Over the next weeks, this question nagged at me along with a growing sense of righteous anger. Richard had built a new life on the ruins of mine, positioning himself as the victim of a defective wife while concealing his own medical reality. He had cost me years of self-doubt and shame, not to mention the financial and emotional toll of our divorce. Should I confront him with what I now knew? The question consumed me as the twins celebrated their third birthday, then their fourth. I had built a good life in Chicago, returned to full-time work at the hospital, made genuine friendships, found joy in motherhood. Did I really want to reopen old wounds? Then came the social media post that changed everything. A former nursing colleague shared an article about Richard receiving a humanitarian award for his work with underprivileged children. The accompanying photo showed Richard and a very pregnant Jessica at a gala, his hand protectively on her stomach, both beaming at the camera. The caption quoted Richard, "My greatest joy is knowing I'll finally be a father. Some dreams take time, but they're worth the wait." The careful peace I'd constructed shattered. Richard wasn't just living his life. He was actively continuing to erase mine to perpetuate the fiction that I had been the obstacle to his happiness, to his fatherhood, that he had suffered through a childless marriage because of my failings. It was time for the truth to emerge, not just for my vindication, but because lies this profound should not be the foundation of anyone's life, not Richard's, not Jessica's, and certainly not their child's. I began making plans to return to Boston. The decision to confront Richard wasn't made lightly or quickly. I spent weeks weighing the potential consequences, discussing the ethics with Margaret and my closest Chicago friends. Some thought I should leave the past buried, focus on my own happiness. Others believed Richard deserved to face the truth of his deception. "Whatever you decide," my friend Tanya said, "do it for yourself, not out of revenge. Revenge keeps you tethered to him." Her words resonated. This couldn't be about hurting Richard as he had hurt me. It had to be about reclaiming my narrative, refusing to remain the villain in his story. And perhaps most importantly, it had to consider my son's future well-being. The catalyst came when I learned Richard would be receiving a prestigious ethics award at the annual Boston Medical Charity Gala, an event celebrating integrity in medicine. The irony was too perfect to ignore. I arranged a 2-week trip to Boston, telling colleagues it was to introduce the twins to extended family. Margaret helped me secure a short-term rental apartment, and offered her home as a base for family visits. Only she knew my true intentions. Boston felt both familiar and foreign as we arrived. The city itself unchanged, yet I viewed it through different eyes. No longer Richard's wife, but Dora Wilson, mother of Michael and Daniel, a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. The first few days were dedicated to family visits, allowing the twins to meet cousins and distant relatives who had only seen them in photos. I carefully managed these interactions, avoiding questions about their paternity with practiced deflections. To the world, they were simply my miracle babies, conceived through modern medicine after my divorce. Beneath this peaceful surface, I was preparing for confrontation. Margaret helped me gather documentation. My medical records from the fertility clinic in Chicago, copies of Richard's basic semen analysis from our marriage, which I'd kept in my divorce files, though I'd never looked at them closely, and most crucially information Susan had helped me obtain about Richard's actual diagnosis and treatment for oligospermia. The evidence painted a damning picture. Richard's initial semen analysis had shown problems, though the summary page emphasized they were mild and unlikely to prevent conception. However, further testing he'd undergone privately at another clinic, information I found through Susan's hospital connections, revealed a much more severe condition. Richard had known he was the primary cause of our infertility for at least 5 years before our divorce. 3 days before the gala, I took the twins to a park near our old neighborhood, knowing the risk of being recognized, but needing to reclaim these spaces as my own. The gamble paid off in unexpected ways when I encountered Barbara, the wife of Richard's closest colleague. Her surprise at seeing me quickly turned to curiosity about the 2 identical boys playing on the swings. "Are they yours?" she asked incredulously, eyes darting between my face and the children. "Yes," I said simply. "My sons, Michael and Daniel." Barbara's confusion was evident. "But Richard always said, everyone thought that I couldn't have children." I finished for her. That was the story he preferred to tell. She absorbed this information, slowly, calculation visible in her eyes as she pieced together the implications. "The gala is this Saturday," she said finally. "Richard's receiving the Ethical Leadership Award. Will you be attending?" "I might make an appearance," I replied noncommittally. Barbara nodded, a subtle smile playing at her lips. I suspected Richard would know about our encounter before dinner that evening. Good. Let him sweat. The night of the gala arrived, and with it a storm of emotions I struggled to contain. Margaret came to my rental apartment to help me prepare and to stay with the twins. "You don't have to do this," she reminded me as I slipped into the elegant black dress I'd purchased for the occasion. "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I do." The Boston Harbor Hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers and Boston's medical elite when I arrived. I gave my name to the check-in attendant, who found me on the guest list thanks to Susan's assistance. Taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, I positioned myself in a corner with good visibility of the entire room. It took 20 minutes for Richard to notice me. I watched his face as recognition dawned. First confusion, then shock, followed by a tightening of his features that suggested both anger and fear. He whispered something to Jessica, whose pregnancy was prominently displayed in an expensive designer maternity gown, then made his way toward me with a forced smile. "Dora," he said, his tone falsely cordial. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I replied calmly. "I heard you were receiving an award for ethics. I wouldn't miss it." His smile faltered. "It's been 5 years. You look, well." "Motherhood agrees with me," I said, watching his expression carefully. Richard's laugh was dismissive. "Still on that, are you? I thought you'd have moved past the obsession by now." "My 4-year-old twin sons would find that statement confusing," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of champagne. The color drained from Richard's face. "What are you talking about?" "Michael and Daniel, born July 17th. They're with Margaret tonight." Richard's expression hardened. "What kind of game are you playing, Dora? We both know you couldn't have children." "No, Richard, you told everyone I couldn't have children. There's a difference. I placed my empty glass on a passing tray. But this isn't the place for this conversation. We should meet tomorrow somewhere private. The children are eager to meet their biological father's side of the family. For medical history purposes, of course. Biological father, he hissed. That's impossible. Nothing's impossible with modern medicine, I countered, as you and Jessica have discovered. Before he could respond, a colleague approached to congratulate him on the upcoming award. Richard introduced me stiffly as an old friend before excusing himself, though not before agreeing to meet me the following morning at a coffee shop near my rental. I stayed only long enough to witness Richard accept his award with a speech about honesty and patient care that would have been comic if it weren't so grotesque. Then I slipped out heart-pounding, but spirit lighter than it had been in years. The confrontation was coming, and with it, the truth. I arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early the next morning, selecting a table in the back corner with a clear view of the entrance. The familiar weight of anxiety pressed against my chest, but beneath it pulsed a new emotion, determination. 5 years of silence were enough. Richard arrived precisely on time, his surgical punctuality unchanged. He wore casual clothes, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, but his expression was anything but relaxed. His eyes scanned the cafe, landing on me with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "This better be quick," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. "Jessica's having a difficult pregnancy. I don't want to leave her alone long." "How concerning," I replied, "especially given her age. She must be, 34 now?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Let's not pretend this is a friendly catch-up. What was that nonsense about twins last night?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, screen showing a photo of Michael and Daniel at the park the previous day. Not nonsense. Reality. Richard stared at the image, his medical training enabling him to quickly assess their age. "They're what? 4. And you expect me to believe they're biologically related to me when we couldn't conceive during 15 years of marriage?" 5 years ago, you told me I was broken, I said quietly. "You said I'd failed to give you children. You destroyed our marriage, my reputation, and my place in our community based on the assertion that my body was defective." "Because it was," he snapped. "We tried everything. Nothing worked." "We did try everything," I agreed. "Multiple rounds of IVF, all focused on my supposedly defective body. Interesting that you never suggested comprehensive testing for yourself." A flicker of unease crossed Richard's face. "I had the standard workup. It was normal." "Was it?" I reached into my bag and withdrew a folder. "Because I have copies of your basic semen analysis from our fertility doctor. The one you summarized for me as completely fine. It actually shows abnormalities that warranted further investigation. Investigation you pursued privately at Boston Reproductive Associates." Richard's face paled slightly. "You're digging up ancient history to what end exactly?" "The end is truth, Richard. Something you've avoided for years." I opened the folder. 4 months after that initial analysis, while telling me we should focus on more invasive treatments for me, you received a diagnosis of severe oligospermia from Dr. Castillo. You were the reason we couldn't conceive, not me. "How did you get those records?" he demanded, voice low with anger. "Boston is a small medical community," I replied, "and people have long memories." Richard glanced around the cafe nervously, then leaned forward. "What do you want money, is that it?" "I want you to look at these boys," I said, sliding another photo across the table. This one showed the twins up close, their features clearly visible. "Your mother's eyes, your father's chin, the distinctive Wilson ear shape. They're yours, Richard." "That's not possible," he insisted, though doubt had crept into his voice. "My condition makes natural conception nearly impossible, yes, but not assisted reproduction with the right interventions." I pulled out the final document, my medical records from Chicago. After our divorce, I underwent an experimental fertility treatment specifically designed for women over 45. It worked. First attempt. Richard grabbed the papers, scanning them with the rapid comprehension of a medical professional. I watched the information register, the treatment protocol, the successful embryo creation, the twin pregnancy confirmation. "This can't be right," he muttered. "The odds against this working for you were astronomical. And yet here we are, two healthy boys who share your DNA." Richard's expression shifted through confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror. "You used my stored sperm samples without permission," he accused. "That's illegal." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, Richard, I used an anonymous donor. The boys aren't biologically yours, but they could have been if you'd been honest about your condition instead of blaming me for our inability to conceive." The relief that washed over his face was quickly replaced by wariness. "Then why are you here? What's the point of all this?" "The point is that you built your new life on a foundation of lies," I said calmly. "You let everyone believe I was defective, obsessed, unstable, when you knew all along that you were the one with fertility issues. You watched me suffer through treatments, blame myself for each failure, and then you discarded me for a younger woman under the pretense that she could give you what I couldn't." "It wasn't like that," Richard protested weakly. "It was exactly like that. And now you're about to receive a child of your own, through the same medical intervention that could have given us children years ago if you'd been honest about your condition." Richard's expression hardened. "So this is revenge. You've come to expose me, ruin my reputation, damage my marriage." "I've come for acknowledgement," I corrected. "I want you to admit what you did, to me privately, right here. And if I don't," I gathered the papers back into my folder, "then the truth finds other ways to surface. Boston Memorial might be interested to know their ethics award recipient built his current life on deliberate medical deception." "You signed a non-disparagement agreement in the divorce," Richard reminded me, desperation edging into his voice. "Medical facts aren't disparagement, Richard. They're data." He stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible behind his eyes. "What do you want?" "I told you. Acknowledgement." "Fine," he conceded, voice tight. "I knew about my condition. I let you believe you were the problem. Is that what you need to hear?" "Why?" I pressed. "Why put me through all that when we could have addressed the actual issue?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "Do you have any idea what it does to a man's ego to learn he's essentially sterile? Especially a surgeon, someone who's supposed to embody virility and strength. So your ego was worth destroying me?" "I didn't think of it that way," he admitted. "I just couldn't face it. Couldn't bear to be seen as less than perfect. And then I met Jessica, and she was young, and for a while I thought maybe it would happen naturally with her." "But it didn't," I supplied. "No, we needed the same interventions you and I should have pursued." Richard's shoulders slumped. "When she got pregnant, I felt like I could finally put it all behind me. No one needed to know the truth." "Except I lived with the consequences of your lie," I reminded him. "I rebuilt my life believing there was something fundamentally wrong with me." Richard had the grace to look ashamed, if only briefly. "What happens now? You've had your confession. Will that be enough?" I considered him, this man I'd once loved, once built a life with, who now seemed smaller, somehow diminished by the revelation of his deception. "I'm not going to expose you publicly," I said finally, "not because you deserve protection, but because your child doesn't deserve that kind of scandal." Relief washed over Richard's face. "Thank you. I can offer financial compensation for your discretion." "I don't want your money," I interrupted, "but I do have conditions." "Name them." "First, you will personally correct the narrative with anyone who matters. Our former friends, colleagues, your family. I don't need public vindication, but I won't have people continuing to believe I was somehow defective." Richard nodded reluctantly. "And second, you will provide complete family medical history information for my son's records. Not because you have any claim to them, but because they deserve that knowledge." "Reasonable enough. Anything else?" I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "Yes, you will become the kind of man who deserves the second chance you've been given, the kind of father who models integrity rather than convenience. because one day your child might cross the paths with mine, and I want them to know a better version of you than I did. Richard stared at me for a long moment. You really have changed. We both have, I replied, gathering my things. I hope at least one of us has changed for the better. As I stood to leave, Richard asked quietly, Will you be returning to Boston permanently? No, I said. My life is in Chicago now. This visit was necessary, but it's not a homecoming. The boys, he hesitated. What have you told them about their father? That he couldn't be with us, but that they are deeply loved for exactly who they are. I slipped the folder into my bag. Some truths are kinder than others, Richard. That's something I've learned that you never did. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, the weight of 15 years of unwarranted shame finally lifting from my shoulders. The aftermath of my confrontation with Richard unfolded gradually in ripples rather than waves. True to his word, perhaps for the first time, Richard began quietly correcting the narrative about our divorce. Former colleagues reached out with awkward apologies or tentative invitations to reconnect during future Boston visits. His family, with whom I'd once been close, sent cards for the twins' birthdays, along with family medical information I'd requested. I returned to Chicago with my sons back to the life we'd built there. The rental apartment that had initially been a temporary refuge had become a true home, filled with finger paintings, toy cars, and the beautiful chaos of raising twin boys as they approached their 5th birthday. My position at the hospital had evolved into a leadership role, again, my experience and innovative approaches recognized with a promotion to Executive Director of Patient Services. The struggling facility I joined out of necessity was now thriving, partly due to systems I'd implemented. There was profound satisfaction in this professional restoration that paralleled my personal rebuilding. 3 months after our Boston trip, I received an unexpected email from Jessica. She had delivered a healthy baby girl and included a photo with her message. What surprised me most was the lack of hostility in her words. Richard has told me everything, she wrote. I won't pretend to understand all that happened between you, but I want you to know I'm ensuring he becomes the man you challenged him to be. Our daughter deserves that, as did you. I sat with that message for a long time before replying with a simple congratulation on their daughter's birth. Some bridges can't be fully rebuilt, but perhaps they can be acknowledged across the distance. As the twins grew, so did my confidence in the life we'd created. Elena remained a dear friend godmother to the boys and a crucial part of our chosen family. Tanya and my other Chicago friends formed a support network that proved more reliable than many blood relations. Margaret visited regularly, her apartment guest room permanently equipped with twin beds for when the boys stayed over. Dating entered the picture again cautiously. At 54 with 4-year-old twins and a demanding career, romance wasn't a priority, but it wasn't unwelcome either. I met James through a hospital fundraiser, a widowed architect with grown children and a quiet sense of humor that drew me in, despite my reservations. I'm a package deal, I warned him on our 3rd date. A very complicated package. The best designs always are, he replied, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that made me remember what genuine attraction felt like. Our relationship progressed slowly, deliberately. James understood my caution, respected the boundaries I established regarding the twins, and never pushed for more than I was ready to give. 6 months in, he met Michael and Daniel, winning them over with his patience and genuine interest in their elaborate Lego constructions. One evening, after the boys were asleep, and James and I were sharing a bottle of wine on my small balcony, he asked about their father. Richard knows about them, I explained, but he's not their biological father, just as he's not the man I once thought he was. I told him the whole story then, the fertility struggles, Richard's deception, our divorce, my miraculous late-in-life pregnancy, through donor conception, and finally my return to Boston to reclaim my truth. When I finished, James was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for trusting me with that, he said finally. Does it change how you see me? I asked. surprising myself with my vulnerability. Yes, he admitted, it makes me admire you even more. As our first year together approached, James suggested we consider finding a larger place, perhaps a house with a yard for the increasingly energetic twins. The implication was clear: he saw a future with all of us. I'm not looking to replace anyone, he assured me. Not their biological father, and certainly not the incredible mother who has given them everything. I just want to add something positive to the equation if you'll let me. The decision wasn't easy. Independence had become both shield and identity for me. Yet the possibility of partnership, genuine partnership based on honesty and mutual respect, held its own appeal. Richard's daughter turned 1. He sent photos and updates maintaining the civil communication we'd established. The boys started kindergarten thriving in their classroom, with their distinct personalities emerging more clearly each day. Michael, the thoughtful observer; Daniel, the fearless experimenter. Both of them kind, secure in the knowledge they were loved unconditionally. At a school event, another parent asked innocently about the twins' father. Years earlier, such a question would have triggered shame or defensive deflection. Now, I simply smiled and said, they have me, and an entire community of people who love them. That evening, I told James I was ready to look at houses together. Life unfolds in chapters we can't always anticipate. The story I thought I was living with Richard, of lasting love, shared success, and family built on mutual respect, proved to be fiction. The revised narrative he created after our divorce, of his patient suffering with a defective wife, was an even more harmful fabrication. But the truth has a persistence that outlasts deception. My truth included pain and betrayal. Yes, but also resilience, unexpected joy, and the discovery that family isn't defined by biology or legal documents, but by love that shows up daily, reliably, honestly. If you're facing betrayal or rebuilding after devastating loss, know that your story isn't over. It's simply taking an unexpected turn. The most beautiful lives are often those reassembled from broken pieces, stronger at the mended places. Have you experienced a major life reinvention? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of women who refuse to be defined by others' narratives. And if you know someone who needs to hear that second chances come in unexpected forms, share this video with them. Thank you for witnessing my truth today, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your story.